Welcome to the Emerging Biotech Leader, where we help biotech leaders maximize the value of their therapeutics from translational development to product launch. We're your hosts. I'm Kim Kushner.
And I'm Ramin Farhad. We are here to help you navigate the pitfalls of the biotech industry and illuminate the path forward.
Welcome to today's episode of the Emerging Biotech Leader. I'm so glad to welcome Chris Kennedy today, where we're really going to be talking about the evolving fractional leadership roles in biotech and the healthcare industry at large. Most specifically, we're going to be talking about the diverse skill sets and experiences that really drive this recent demand for fractional leadership, as well as the opportunities to do more of it as boards and organizations really evolve for the future. So Chris, thank you so much for joining today.
Thanks for having me. Really excited to dive in.
To start us off, could you maybe give a little bit of your background? You come from a very diverse background in terms of experiences that have led you down this path. And so I'd love to start out there and just hear a little bit about what brought you to your current role.
Sure. Well, you can tell by some of the gray hair here now that I'm approaching nearly 25 years in pharma, biotech, med device. Kind of started with no plan, actually. And I don't highly recommend that as I'm raising 4 children. And I fell into pharmaceuticals really early on the commercial side with a few of the Fortune 100, 500 companies. And so really learned the foundation around commercialization after a drug has been approved, which is much different, as we all are well aware, than the development process. And then so if we break my career into thirds, the first third was really on this commercial big pharma biotech front. Pharma, switching over to biotech, was a little bit more innovative in terms of entrepreneurialism's alive and well when you are launching the biotech sector. A lot more problem solving, I would say, goes into that, as well as the strategy and the tactics really have to align without any type of gap, because you're kind of doing everything in real time in that biotech sector as you're learning from feedback from the marketplace to evolve. And so I really liked the nuances there. And then the next third of my career was truly in the entrepreneurial space of launching rare disease pharmacies. Really appreciated that element because of the noble mission at hand with a patient that you would get to know who is the end consumer. And so I found that a very, very invigorating space, but also that noble mission of being able to go home at the end of the day and know where were your efforts actually headed, and to actually know the patient that you were impacting was greatly rewarding. And so from the different 503A and B type compounding pharmacies to true rare disease, traditional pharmacies to home infusion pharmacies. And those are all different segments within the envelope, if you will, of pharmacy, and really enjoyed that space. And then kind of got to that halfway point in my career, I guess we'll say, where I was like, well, now where do I go? And that's when I focused about 8 or 9 years ago in the early stage startup space. And as you can imagine, there's been a lot of lessons learned. And now I'm getting these messages often through LinkedIn or recruiters that people are looking for these fractional potential resources or leadership folks that aren't afraid of that early stage space, which is really a refreshing thing for me to see. And so I'm excited to kind of talk about, just as many as my failures as the successes that I've seen, particularly in that third quarter here of my career.
Really appreciate that overview and kind of the storyline. Before we jump into what got you to where you are today, I do want to spend a quick minute on your pharmacy background, because that is fairly unique in the biopharma space in general for people to come from the true pharmacy distribution, like drug product side. What have you learned from that that's helped you evolve your positioning in terms of the roles you're really taking on now in true more like drug development?
Yeah, great question. When you think of pharmacy in general, like I remember for myself, for example, I was scared because you hear this commoditized marketplace where really it's pharmacies that are competing on small differentiation. A lot of times it's the service at the counter, that we're all familiar with when we go to either a big box or a local pharmacy. And then you think about the customization piece that was happening in these compound pharmacies that I just hadn't been exposed to. And between the two of them, there's actually a lot more in common than not. And that is both are the one place that a patient has to do something in healthcare one time a month, meaning that if you want your prescription, there's an interaction that happens in no matter where you're at in pharmacy. And that interaction can be one of the most powerful things in healthcare, because that's often when a patient's pulse is taken in terms of, I just got a new diagnosis that maybe the doctor that prescribed me my medication isn't aware of. I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, in which a pharmacy now becomes a service provider, and potentially, outside of talking about drug interactions, becomes even more entrenched in the continuum of care. And so when you go over from a traditional pharmacy to compound pharmacy, where you're doing customized medications around what a physician, him or herself, feels is needed for that patient, you start to become more in this educational role for the entire ecosystem, from the patient to the provider to the potential payer that's lurking out there that doesn't want to cover a med, that might consider it based on the dosage or a form. And so the beautiful part about what I've learned in pharmacy is some of the most innovative and creative people in healthcare reside there. And it's not about just filling a prescription and moving on. And so I've had a tremendous amount of education given back to me. How do you translate that to the direct-to-consumer piece, but also, more importantly, I would argue, to the provider that knows they have such a resource behind them in a care management tool that oftentimes people don't view a pharmacy as. So I've taken that when I'm thinking about drug development, and so have the kind of the nimble aspect of what pharmacies do to creatively compete in a very competitive space oftentimes, and then try to apply some of those when we're thinking about on down the line from this drug that we think, or this drug candidate that we hope might have a big runway. What's it going to look like when it gets down into the details of that drug actually making it to a patient's doorstep, which will include a pharmacy? So I like to kind of go back in time and then forward in time between these experiences to hopefully have a better outcome for investors.
It's such an important point, how you're weaving together these experiences from the patient-facing element of pharmacy operations to thinking about drug-drug interactions and kind of the bigger picture of what's going on with the patient that then translates into their overall care journey, workflow, willingness to be on or stay on a potential product that we're developing, be on or stay on a trial that we're working on. The full life cycle seems to have some connectivity back to that point. And one of the things that has really stood out to me from your background is how you've taken nuggets from these different quarters or these different thirds of your career so far to apply it to what you're working on now, both in terms of board roles and otherwise. Can you talk a little bit more about where you are now and kind of what you've brought along the way?
Oh, sure. So I'm currently the CEO of a really innovative organization called Pacific Genetech. And the technology is actually out of the University of Arkansas. Has been a tremendous partner. And I think just starting with that front end of being the CEO in an early stage biotech company, and then the strategic partner, the alignment with the licensed partner being University of Arkansas. I've licensed technologies now from six different large academic centers. Each academic center is its own entity and operates through tech transfer in its own way. And I've learned both great lessons and then painful ones in which I wasn't as successful about getting aligned early with every partner, every stakeholder that's going to be impacted by what you're trying to bring to the marketplace, whether that impact is positive or negative. Reaching alignment earlier can really help. So the University of Arkansas, I'm often bragging about here, even though I'm based out of Chicago, my office is in Arkansas, so I would bounce back and forth. But I talk about Arkansas because their approach has been naturally nimble. I mean, maybe I should coin that term, but they naturally have been speaking the language of trying to help their technologies on behalf of their scientists truly launch and make traction in the marketplace. And so when you have that, it opens the door to resources that an early stage company like ours couldn't pay for today based on our budget. And so don't want to say it's pro bono, but it's pro alignment around a common mission of removing the bottlenecks that oftentimes stand in the way of technologies getting launched. And so the other component of that is at Pacific Genetech, I've been fortunate enough to go through a restructure in which the current board that I'm now reporting to fully embraces the power of strategic fractional leadership, meaning that if you start building a company around measurement, performance measurement, whether it's in the lab, in the administration, or the impact it will have in the marketplace, if the common denominator is measurement, then you kind of set your company up for a way in which you're able to kind of follow the dollar, the investor dollar, all the way through where it's actually going, and then provide better feedback to somebody like myself running a company as to where I should look at deploying resources. So long-winded question, but an important one, because you're catching me now at the 8-9 years into a very successful, what I would say, fractional role. And if we go back in time, you can expose where I wasn't so successful on the whys.
Absolutely. You had made a comment when we've connected in the past that this concept of fractional leadership is not personal, but it's really evolving with the program and where the program is and where it needs to go.
Yeah.
Can you shed a little bit of light on what your experience has taught you about that relative to program success?
Sure. And I recognize I have a significant bias to this. I'm proud to be from a very small farming community in central Illinois, Aerosmith, Illinois, if you're looking for a vacation spot. That's where grandma and grandpa still are today. But in that small community, I was fortunate that I have two relatives on both sides of my family. One was a winner of a World Series in Major League Baseball. He's a coach. And then I have an uncle who coaches many NFL quarterbacks like the Patrick Mahomes of the world. So growing up, measuring in scoreboard, I know both of my relatives learned that from something as basic as running a farm, where there's no margin for error. I mean, to put food on the table, you have to know exactly the acreage that you're farming, potentially what you're planting. And if you mismanage that, the family feels it. So those stakes I like to remind myself in the late nights or early mornings that my stakes aren't as drastic as what my forefathers and my elders went through. And if you think about that actual scoreboard piece, even though I tend to bang that drum probably too much if you were to interview my wife, that scoreboard translates all cultures that I've noticed as I've run international companies. It translates scientists to the janitor in the back who's making sure that everything's set up properly before we go into a clean room, let's say. It impacts the front end commercial team, the administrator, and the investor. We can all align around, here's the scoreboard, or to put it differently, here's where we've measured where we're currently at, as painstaking as it might be. Here's our gaps, and let's see if what we're applying to the gaps are addressing the problem, making it better or worse. So I feel like the riddle is much more basic to solve if we get back to the basics of data. To your point about when I made that statement, and I have, that just like a scoreboard, it really isn't an emotional thing. I mean, I know we're in a culture today because I have young ones that are playing youth sports, and both sides are getting trophies now at some of these events, which is confusing for kids, confusing for parents. But that's not what happens in science. That's not what happens when you're running a biotech and you miss your milestone, or I mismanage an investor meeting in which we had somebody that was going to invest and now our program's in jeopardy. Those stakes are really high. There's no trophy for me in that scenario. And so I think we get a lot of inquiries, for example, where somebody might reach out and say, I'm really interested in what you guys are doing. I'm a scientist. I've got 30 years of experience. And right off the bat, my stomach will dip, because then I'm wondering, could I get somebody with this skill set to see the nobility and the excitement around our mission, and maybe consider helping us where we need them? And if we guarantee we won't waste their time where they won't be needed. And that's risky, because sometimes that might come across that we're saying, oh, you're not worth a full salary of what you normally have. But in early stage biotech, that's not the ecosystem. What we're saying is, can you help us where we currently are and grow with us? So as Christopher raised more capital, then you become, instead of a fractional chief medical officer, chief scientific officer, you're growing with the company. And then here's the beautiful part, Kim. I know SSI has done a great job of embracing this. The teaming that's built potentially from starting as fractional and coming together through the bumps and the peaks and the valleys in biotech are things you can't put on paper. It's hard to capture the essence of that team building unless we go back to my sports analogy, which was my favorite thing ever. And that was just being a small cog in a wheel, or in the wheel. And I never scored a touchdown, for example, when I played college. I played from Pee-wee football to college football. My kids think it's insane that dad never scored a touchdown and they like playing football. And until I had my children saying that to me, I thought I helped score every touchdown since I was a youngster, because in that game, you feel the bond of you did your job so it all would take place. And ironically, as basic as all of this is, I think my success has come because I've stayed true to what I can offer a biotech team. And it isn't my scientific knowledge, right? It's understanding I know what I don't know, and I'm willing to go and maybe reach out to somebody I can't afford and see if I can recruit them in a fractional way so that my investors and shareholders will win.
You're calling out a bunch of really critical themes here. As we talk about the fractional leadership, we are thinking, how do we get the right individuals to operate at the maximum of their skill set and of their potential. To your point, I think at times people take it almost personally, like you don't want all of my time or something like that. And the economics are also, I think challenging for many people to take on. But it also means that everybody gets to work at the top of their field in terms of the skills they're really great at. And that is something that our team has been talking about for quite some time. How do you optimize for each person at the table? And you might want 5 people at the table in a fractional capacity that each are optimizing for the best thing they can possibly do for the team. Then having one person really great at 1 or 2 things and then stretching to try to cover all these other things that really aren't their ideal skill set. And so it's the balance of the right player at the right time. And I know we keep coming back to the sports analogies, but the underpinning of what you described here, which I think might be one of the most critical failure points of biotech, is this human capital equation is very much dependent on teaming. And you can bring some of the most skilled leaders in the industry together, but if they can't operate like a team, they're not working towards a common goal, they don't have that like shared vision and shared camaraderie, it's really hard to execute successfully, even with the best possible underpinning science. And so I think that theme can't be underappreciated relative to what you just described.
It's really what life is like in the trenches today, what you've just captured there. And I'm just reflecting as you're talking about a time in which the failure, I think, was because we wanted to recruit the best scientists. We wanted an enormous board of experts in the cell and gene therapy space, for example. And we needed to, consider honorariums. We had a lot of overhead we walked into the venture with. And one of my favorite, statements is leadership by examples. I'm raising my young ones because I feel that is on the CEO's shoulders, right? I mean, square, right? And the target of everything is the CEO demonstrating and doing exactly what he expects from others. And so when you take that approach, I've made a lot of sacrifices to these roles where I'm at. I'm not getting the maximum, opportunity when you think about the financial reward potentially. It allows me in a discussion, though, to maintain that leadership by example and being fully transparent. These are some of the highest IQ people when we're talking about where you and I live in the ecosystem. And in that, I think what we all crave, whether you're at the top game of cutting edge R&D development and cell and gene therapy space, you've got a breakthrough technology that no one has even considered, in the academic center. In the center of all this, everyone appreciates authenticity. And so I think that's the competitive advantage is when I'm meeting with somebody for the first time, I'm not in recruitment mode. I'm in expose who we really are in our front end. I've been on the other side where it wasn't fully exposed until I came into the organization. And had I known what the fire was going into an organization from my own lens, then I wouldn't have been able to be prepared for it and not take 6 weeks to learn where the real fire was. I think that now, because of the buzz around fractional is not a bad word, people can maximize their skill sets with multiple companies. But going back to what I talked about transparency, as a CEO or an executive or a chief medical officer, there's a good chance there's boards involved or another company's involved. And so transparently articulating to that board, I've got a non-conflict opportunity that can help subsidize what I'm currently doing, reduce the spend of the current organization. I haven't had anybody push back on that. And if you think about what we're doing for that high profile or very talented individual, we're actually helping them have a very fulfilling career where they're picking and choosing their challenges. I keep drawing a circle here, but if you have 2 to 3 opportunities, maybe 4, depends if you're an advisor board, and you look at that job, those jobs don't exist in the marketplace. And maybe unless you're an executive in residence at an investment firm, right? Or an operational partner in an investment firm. And so I think it's really, when I learned about what you all have done, to me, it's like I knew someone at some point or organization would say, well, how do we take what we've been talking about in this discussion, and how do we crystallize that into a framework that's still moldable, but has fundamentals in it? And I think that's why I'm so excited to be on this call. I never thought this call would happen. Most of my last 8 or 9 years, I'd have a recruiter maybe reach out about something. I would offer, listen, I'm working on a very exciting project right now. I'd love to consult on this because it's infectious disease, which is one of my passion points. Would your company be open to that? Oh, no, you won't be focused. I would get a lot of feedback. And then I have had other people look at my LinkedIn and say, Chris, love what you're doing. I would tell you as a mentor, maybe you should just focus on one thing. And I'll tell you, if that was imposed upon me as a more of a catalyst mindset, it wouldn't be a rewarding job. And frankly, I wouldn't be able to maximize and get up every morning feeling like I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. So staying true to my mission has definitely been my biggest challenge in the last 25 years. Like, is it okay to be an outlier? And I'm happy to hear now with this fractional universe becoming more of a commonplace thing that I feel normal. So it's therapeutic, Kim.
Yeah, I can see that. I feel the same. And as you describe it, you and I have kind of shared backgrounds related to the public health world. And I've always felt in public health, goal has always been to learn as broad as you possibly can of every variable that could impact the industry and impact a patient getting or not getting better, or prevention of being sick in the first place. And so you can't think of it in one lens. And so everything that you're describing in terms of non-conflicted opportunities to optimize how you're engaging in the industry, learn from other sectors, bring that innovation back into other areas you're working. I've always seen that as a net positive. But you call out two key areas that I want to highlight that have been resistance points for the industry. And we have not solved for it. I'm interested if you've solved for it. But it's this idea that lack of focus and lack of skin in the game in terms of your long-term involvement or desire for the asset or the company to be successful. How do you overcome conversations around that?
Well, I'm sure you're familiar with a pretty simple quote, and that's begin with the end in mind. It's interesting like how I become so basic now with the learnings. And it's almost like that maybe is what, the journey of life is, and that's wisdom. But, you begin with that end in mind of where something is going, whether it's a business, a mission, et cetera. And understanding that you're plugging a team together around this common mission. You mentioned skin in the game. I think it's natural for all of us to want to know, is my effort actually playing into the mission? If you were to interview, and one of my favorite Harvard Business Review articles highlighted this, you interview most people at the organization, they can't tell you the mission statement. Now, you tell that to children in a classroom and they're in junior high, they think that that's insane. Why do you have a mission statement? So working together on organizations when I've been a part of the startup ecosystem was having my team help build that mission and then helping them show how their jobs intersect and how they sometimes are not competitive, but maybe aren't even aligned on some things, but being transparent about how we can align all of those things to this common end, and then holding our teams accountable as a reminder, hey, don't forget at the end of this, that was a very intense scientific R&D discussion with the commercial team that says there's no way this will happen in the marketplace. Great. But let's get back on that next meeting around the mission and where we're going and why these tough challenges matter. So I think if you begin with the end in mind and keeping it, it helps you simplify things down. I also think when we think about kind of that topic in general, end in mind, that patient in healthcare is always sitting there at the end for us. And if you get very, very granular, that if I'm starting an R&D company today, what I'm challenging this industry for as we look at fractional is get commercial involved at a time in which it doesn't naturally seem like it fits. By doing that, it allows us to bypass so many pitfalls of going down roads where when you put an investor dollar right into what should be a machine, I can tell you that dollar wasn't effective, but it did uncover something in the science. We didn't hit our milestone. The data came back. It didn't seem accurate, but that's where the dollar went. If an investor knows that, they're much more apt to then say, wow, it's not a Vegas slot machine. I'm not pulling down like some of the companies I've invested in where I put the dollars in, not sure where they're going. So it unifies everyone around that common mission. And I think that those are something that I'd like to just see get more and more accelerated, because with a fractional commercial leader in that early stage, you're actually able to have a discussion. Now, it might not be the most comfortable one, but it ultimately can help carve a lot of investor dollars from being used the wrong way. And you're hearing it in my voice. I've been a part of coming in too late. I haven't been a part of coming in too early yet, outside of being a part of a launch team where I'm obviously more of a commercial-minded CEO. And maybe you don't need a commercial-minded CEO, but that skill set seems to be used in every venture I've been a part of. And it isn't as costly as it seems, because when we hear commercial, I think a lot of times investors say, we're not even close to that. We haven't even talked to a payer yet. Well, you might want to talk to a payer before you find out that the payer will never pay for this new technology where we just put $3 million into the R&D piece of it. So you've heard a lot of these things with your clients, Kim. I mean, I'd love to hear your feedback. Do you think I'm onto something with that?
I think you're more than onto it. And I'm just going to record you and take this not in a podcast and make it a commercial, because it's, for one, our development team is going to be very happy to hear develop with the end in mind. That's something that we've been talking about for quite some time. And we've been debating internally and externally for quite some time that you do need commercial input very early in the development life cycle. And it can be from defining the CDP and the TPP. So very, very early stage, phase 1, that is all going to set you up for what your late program is going to look like. And if you're picking endpoints that are not commercially viable or endpoints that patients ultimately don't care about, you're either going to have to redo work down the line, do additional studies post-approval. You're going to have this long, expensive cycle that you're trying to dig yourself out of. And ultimately, there's really 2 paths that every biotech company is worried about. It's true patient access. How do I get a patient to actually use this drug in a commercially viable setting? And or the step before that, which is a strategic exit where somebody else does that for me. Sure. There's not really an alternative or a failure path that anybody's interested in. And so in every single one of those, you need to have that commercial-minded thinking, because you need to prepare for somebody else to take it to that next stage, or you need to be ready to do it yourself. And you need to be flexible in terms of how are you designing the company and the program to enable that access on the other end. And that's patient access, it's market access, that's physicians understanding the core science and then more of med affairs perspective. All of those things have to start really early. And I think drug development is no longer, a linear cycle in a straight stepwise fashion. It has to be a lot more iterative. And I think that's hopefully a positive externality that comes from this more fractional type leadership approach that people have been moving toward.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, you mentioned, skin of the game, and I talked about the end in mind and being a part of the mission and where does my job fit in, but nothing translates better than understanding there's some sort of equity incentive that the team all knows they have that together. So when you add the financial component, it's really interesting, because I won't be able to ever match in my current role. I will never be able to match a package, for any player that's in the commercial space where they're actually commercializing product. But what I can guarantee people is, maybe you are a scientist or maybe you're a business person. I can guarantee you that what I can as a CEO do is create a culture in which I want you to be on an executive call with me where we're talking about business development, but you're a scientist or an R&D person and you're not comfortable. You're an analyst. You're not comfortable. You've never been on a call like that. A listen mode only call opens everyone's eyes to their discipline that they might not have had exposure to at a big company. So I can nimbly offer experiences that ultimately are fulfilling in a new way. And I have to brag about my current fractional scientist. I mean, she has been beyond what I would aim for in terms of someone that has fully embraced those business discussions so much that I'm like, oh man, I'm going to get fired and she's going to be CEO. She's evolved so much that I'd rather see her talking to the BD companies that are potentially looking at licensing our assets than myself. The lady that knows the science, now understands why they're offering an LOI, understands what type of science they're looking for. And it's so fulfilling to see someone on the science side now say, wow, maybe I could be an executive of some sort. I never thought of that before. At the same time, taking the executive like me, being on the science call, and for the first time, really understanding what digital chemistry is doing with AI to disrupt that. I mean, so I'm in full education mode most of the time, because I've never been embarrassed to raise my hand and say, hey, I don't understand this at all. And so I think, to tie this kind of in a nice bow, in the interview process, when we're building these high performance teams, there's a characteristic of curiosity that I think many of us share. And when you're curious, like many people are, and if you put curiosity and you bolt on top of that, the willingness to not be fearful of being judged in a safe space, which is on us to create safe spaces, and you'll raise your hand and say, hey, I don't want to be the only room that didn't know that. But just like in high school, I remember this oftentimes, I wouldn't raise my hand because I looked around the room like, I'm not going to be that guy. I think if we're that guy or that gal who raises their hand, I think it's going to be even more rewarding than you get your traditional 9-to-5 job where it's very regimented. You have a salary. And for people that think that's intriguing and they go wholeheartedly into the entrepreneurial space here, fractional is a phenomenal space, and I look forward to continue to grow. Hopefully SSI will continue to do the same thing in the science school because, wow, I've seen a couple of the behind-the-scenes organizations that you guys have had a hand in. Your track history is getting pretty big right now.
Thank you. I very much appreciate that. And we're looking forward to working more closely with you, Chris, as this industry continues to evolve. I think it's only going to continue to benefit patients, and more innovation is going to get to the market as a result of various skills being deployed at the right time in the right space to all different kinds of programs in parallel. And that speed and that portfolio approach is really going to make the big difference. So thanks for joining today, Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Emerging Biotech Leader, an SSI strategy podcast. Join us each month for more conversations with biotech leaders. If you'd like to help navigating the complexities of biotech, reach out to our team at ssistrategy.com. Don't forget to hit subscribe and leave a review.